It's my distinctive pleasure, and I'm honored to introduce David Turk, the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Energy, whose impressive career includes leadership in shaping international energy policies and driving clean energy innovation. Before assuming his current role, David served as the Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, focusing on assisting countries worldwide in their transition towards clean energy solutions. He led initiatives on digitizing energy systems, advancing clean hydrogen technologies, and tracking progress on various clean energy sectors. During the Obama-Biden administration, David Turk played a pivotal role in coordinating global technologies and clean energy efforts at DOE. Notably, he contributed to the launch of Mission Innovation, a global initiative aimed at enhancing clean energy innovation. David's expertise also spans to national security and legislative affairs, having served as a special assistant to the President and senior director at the U.S. National Security Council. He also played a significant role at the U.S. Department of State, including as Deputy Special Envoy to Climate Change and contributing to a New START treaty ratification efforts in the U.S. Senate. With a background in national security and legislative affairs, from his early roles in the U.S. Senate and House Oversight Committee, David Turk brings a wealth of experience and insights to the renewable energy landscape. We appreciate the Secretary's contributions to the industry and his presence at this year's Cleantech Summit. Please help me welcome Deputy Secretary of the Department of Energy, David Turk.
Well, thanks, Marcus, for the introduction, and it's just phenomenal to be with you all. I know we're after lunch, and for some of us, this is a lower energy time of our day, so I'm going to try to make this interactive. I've never done it interactive this way, so we're going to try a bit of an experiment. I'd love to start, since it's March Madness, and we're here in North Carolina, and just do a little polling here to see where our audience is. So we've got a game coming up. Some of you may be noticing at 2:45. North Carolina against Wagner. Who here thinks North Carolina is going to win? Does anybody think Wagner's going to win? Yeah. All right, there we go. All right, so I have to do at least one more set of questions here. Who thinks North Carolina is going to win the entire tournament on the men's side? All right. Now, I know we're here in the University of North Carolina, but we're not that far from Duke. I see one Duke t-shirt. Who thinks Duke is going to win it all? All right, there's quite a... All right, NC State, anybody here? NC State? All right, good. All right, so far so good on the interactive part. I've worked for many, many years, as Marcus has said, in climate and clean energy. And sometimes it's quite daunting, the scale of the challenge. There's an opportunity there. There's a huge opportunity there as well, but the scale of the challenge in front of us. What science is telling us we need to do is to decarbonize and get to net zero by mid-century. For an advanced economy like ours, President Biden has set a goal, rightfully so in my opinion, to get us to net zero by 2050. Now, 2050 is not that far off, right? We're in 2024, that's 26 years, and that's net zero, that's decarbonizing not just electricity, and we've made significant progress in our country on electricity, but it's also transportation, which is actually the largest segment of our emissions right now in the US. It's industry, all types of industry, it's buildings, et cetera, et cetera. For my second kind of polling interactive question to you all, one of the pieces of analysis that I felt most proud of that I did when I worked at the International Energy Agency was something called Tracking Clean Energy Progress. And what the analysis was to break up all of these sectors, transportation, industry, electricity, the power sector, 50 different sectors, 50 different technologies, and compare the progress in each of those to what it needs to be doing to be on that net zero by mid-century trajectory, right? So 50 different sectors. So it's solar, it's wind, it's hydrogen, it's integration technologies, it's you name it is part of that 50 sectors. How many of those sectors do you think right now, the latest numbers were from 2023, are on track towards that net zero trajectory? The cost reductions, the deployment numbers, it's a little bit of art that goes in with the science part of it. How many of those 50 do you think are on track right now at the scale, at the pace that we need to be on in order to be successful? Anyone want to make a guess? We got a 3, we got a 0, we got a 5, 1. It ends up being 3. So 3 of 50 different technologies and sectors are on track. So those 3 are solar, and solar's made remarkable progress. We're up to, in our country, about 4% of our electricity generated from solar. That's up quite a bit. We had a record year last year in 2023. The more exciting number is if you look just 2 years into the future, we're going to be up to 7%. So 4% to 7% just in a 2-year period of time. Remarkable progress. A lot of folks have worked on this for years and years in laboratories, getting it out there at utility scale, putting it on people's homes as well. Remarkable progress. EVs is another bright spot. EVs right now globally are on track. In our own country, we've quadrupled the number of EVs sold since President Biden took office. We're up to about 10%. 1 out of every 10 cars sold right now is an EV or a plug-in hybrid. Other parts of the world are even further along. Europe's up about 23% of their vehicles sold being EVs. China's actually over 30% right now. Norway's at something like 80% right now. They're the world leader in terms of EV penetration going forward. The third, just so you're keeping track, is lighting. We've made remarkable progress in lighting, LEDs. Think of the cost reductions. Think of what we've done on that front. But we've got 47 different sectors and technologies that aren't on track yet, that need more innovation, that need cost reduction, that need deployment going forward. What it means is if you're interested in a career in this space, there's a lot of job security, job opportunities because we need so much progress, because we need to focus, and there really is no alternative to being successful here. Now, here's another question for you all, and I think this is a bright spot of what's happened over the last several years on climate and clean energy. We've got around 200 or so countries around the world. I want you to guess how many of those countries, their leaders have made net zero commitments by mid-century. Some have made it by 2050. Developing countries can be a little bit after that, depending on how they look at their numbers. But how many countries out of 200 countries have made net zero commitments? Their leaders have made net zero commitments. Any guesses? What was that? 50. All right, we got 50. 1-5. I saw someone guessing over here. What number? Just guess a number. 190. All right, we got a very optimistic colleague up here. Please. 116. All right. Anyone else want to guess? 75. It's actually 140. So pretty impressive, right? 140 countries. That's the U.S. China's made a net zero commitment by 2060. A number of key countries around the world have made net zero commitments. Now, that's impressive, and a lot of people are responsible for that. A lot of folks have held their leaders accountable to make those kinds of commitments going forward. But it's one thing to make a commitment, it's another thing to actually deliver, right? To actually do it in the real world at the pace, at the scale that we need to deliver on. In the U.S., our trajectory towards net zero to 2050 takes us to a 50% reduction by 2030 off a 2005 baseline. So 50% reduction. That is daunting. That's a lot of work to do. But I want to leave you with this positive note, and there's a couple more questions embedded in here. Before this president, before historic legislation was passed over the last few years, what trajectory do you think we were on? We have been reducing our emissions. We actually reduced our emissions 4.1% in the U.S. last year. That is a pretty impressive number, especially with healthy GDP growth going forward. What trajectory do you think we were on before historic legislation was passed? The IRA, the bill, all the things that I hope you've heard of. If you haven't heard of it, I'm happy to talk about it, and I'll share a little bit more about what we're trying to do. 20%. 20% was a trajectory, 20% reductions. That's not 50%, but it's not nothing, right? So we, because of all sorts of work done at states, federal government, other kinds of things like that. That's before this president came in, before we had historic legislation passed. And now we're executing on this historic legislation. So Inflation Reduction Act, it does reduce inflation, but it also is the biggest climate bill, biggest clean energy bill, not just in the US's history, but it's the biggest bill ever, single piece of legislation ever in humanity's existence to really deal with climate change. We're talking tax incentives across the board, 30% or even higher, depending on the adders, for 10 plus years. That is certainty we've never had in our country, a wind at the back of all the solar, the wind, hydro, geothermal, you name it, on that technology area. Our department was given $100 billion in grant money extraordinarily outside our normal budget process to do all sorts of grant works, hydrogen hubs, helping folks in rural communities, helping tribes, helping schools. We just announced yesterday another $180 million going to schools to try to replace their boilers, to try to bring solar PV, to try to just do insulation, easy things that are going to make it better for students in classrooms, but also save electricity and promote carbon reductions at the same time. We've got a loan program, literally hundreds of billions of dollars. It was our federal loan program at the Department of Energy that helped Tesla get up and running back in early days. Elon Musk doesn't like to talk about that very often, but it was actually a federal loan that helped that company. And this is all very targeted. This is all supporting entrepreneurs, supporting companies, supporting states, supporting local communities. Do what you want to do, but just do it quicker, do it pace what we need to do. So if we were headed for a 20% reduction in our emissions with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's another bill, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, but just one session of Congress and one presidential term, assuming we execute, and we need to execute, we need to implement, but we've gone from a 20% reduction trajectory to 2030 to what number? What do people think? This will be my last polling question. Any ideas? Yeah, please, over here. 40%. 60%. 32%, very precise. It's actually 40%. If we could put the slide up on the screen. 40%. So this red is the trajectory our country was on before this president took over, before these historic pieces of legislation were passed. The blue is the trajectory we need to be on. That gets us to net zero. 2050, for those sitting in the back, is the very far right end. That is the net zero trajectory. That green is the modeling, depending on how we interpret provisions, depending on how we execute and implement. That green is the trajectory we're now on. So just want to leave you with that sense of hope and optimism that when there is concerted effort, there are folks that step up. We can pass legislation, we can put policy in place that allows us to get from that red to that green. Now we're not done, we need to get to the blue. We need to be on the blue trajectory. There's more work to do, there's an awful lot more opportunity to do. There's 47 other sectors and technology areas that aren't on track yet. There's room for innovation, there's room for entrepreneurship. What's going to make the difference here, and there's nothing inevitable about failure and there's nothing inevitable about success, right? We could easily slip back up into the red, but we can also go down into the blue. We've got agency, we've got control over this. It's folks making a difference. It's everybody as voters. It's everybody as activists in their communities. It's folks making a career to be an engineer, to be an entrepreneur, to start up a new company, to get into this line of work one way or another. There's huge opportunity here, and this is what makes the difference between the blue, the red, and somewhere in between. All right, well, thank you for the interaction. Thank you for your time and attention, and I want to thank folks in particular who have made careers in the clean energy space, in the climate space. I know we're at a summit where there's a lot of phenomenal folks who have literally been living and breathing and getting us into that blue and onto that green trajectory going forward. For young people here, for students here, and we're going to bring 3 of them up here and have a little bit of a discussion here for you all. I hope you consider a career in climate. I hope you consider a career in clean energy. I have found it to be incredibly exciting area, incredibly fulfilling. It's literally taking me all over the world. I lived in Paris for 5 years working on clean energy at the International Energy Agency. That's pretty cool. I've had a chance to be an envoy, special envoy, deputy special envoy for climate change, working with countries around the world. And now I get the pleasure of being the #2 at the Department of Energy with all of that funding, with all of that influx of talent. We've actually hired up 1,000 people to do all this work to try to help states, local governments, and the private sector do things at scale. It's phenomenally interesting career for those who are thinking about what they want to do with their lives as well. All right, so we've got some students. Come on up. They're both, the gentlemen are wearing ties. I took my tie off. I hope that's okay. And please grab seats. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. And maybe if you could each introduce yourselves, and then I know you've got some questions for me, and I've got some questions for you.
All right, is this thing on? Oh, hello, everybody. Some of you recognize me. Most of you probably don't. My name is Anthony. I am a junior here at UNC studying environmental science, and I will be one of the Q&A people today.
Hello everyone, I'm Victoria. I'm also a sophomore pursuing environmental science and data science, and I'm very excited to have a conversation with you, Deputy Secretary.
Hey Victoria, before you guys finish your introductions, and we'll go back as well to Anthony, could you tell us why you got interested in this area, in this line of study and hopefully profession? Love to hear your origin stories, if you don't mind sharing it with this select group of friends that we have here.
Yeah, I can take it away. I think when I first started becoming passionate in environmental sciences, I wasn't sure which direction I wanted to go into, and I started to really hear more about renewable energy and the possibilities that it brought, and I realized that I could use a lot of my analytical skills for something that could actually influence change, and that really excited me, just the opportunities. This is like never before. In the past 10 years, we've had so much growth, and it's something that I know I want to be at the forefront of change, and yeah, so that's why I'm passionate about it.
Awesome.
I guess I'll go second. I grew up on a cattle farm in southeastern Ohio in the foothills of the Appalachians, and my family has a very integrated history with coal, and the entire region does as well. And so as I've seen the progress made in the environmental science space, in the energy space, and have learned more about this energy transition that our country and our world is undergoing, I became keenly aware of just how promising rural areas were in helping and aiding and accelerating this transition. What I wasn't too aware of was the progress being made at a legislative and at a technology level to help these rural areas take their share in the transition. And so that was something I became keenly aware of and keenly interested in, and learning how to work policy and create new technologies to help coal miners and coal towns take part in the renewable energy transition is something that I've become deeply passionate about.
Awesome. Jackson?
And then I'm Jackson. I'm a freshman at UNC studying environmental science and business. And kind of going off of that, like, I came into UNC thinking I was just going to do business, but also knew about the climate change and the problems, and wanted to know how to make an impact because it's such a big problem that our generation is facing. And so I took Dr. Ganji's ENEC 201 class, Intro to Environmental Science, and kind of fell in love with how do we solve these problems. And so I'm interested in using business skills to combat climate change.
Awesome. Good. All right. So I've asked you guys a question. You can certainly ask a question if you like as well. All right.
Yeah. So one of the problems we talked about a lot about the IRA and our ENEC 201 class, and how that really provides funding and all this opportunity, and it just really spurred energy developers to start new projects and start drawing up plans. But one of the problems with kind of the execution along that is just the large interconnection queues, and just the transmission as well alongside that. So can you talk about how the Department of Energy is trying to combat and reduce these queues and also expand transmission?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jackson. And one thing I've found in my career is rarely do good things happen by accident. The Inflation Reduction Act, we just looked at the graph, we looked at the bend in trajectory in a significant way. that is incenting, encouraging an awful lot of activity out there, including the manufacture of a lot of clean energy products in our country, batteries, PV that we've not had before, which is incredibly exciting, and huge numbers of jobs in North Carolina and other states around the country as well. So it's purposeful, it's intentional, and as we talked about, it's a big scale, right? But it's also supporting an awful lot of private sector activity out there, right? Like companies, private sector, entrepreneurs, they're the ones who get it done at scale. But there is a role, I think, for government to provide the incentives, especially if we want to be purposeful and intentional about actually solving climate change, something that's challenging on that front. So you mentioned transmission. I think this is one of the areas that keeps me up at night, to be honest with you. Like, this is a big, big deal for folks who've looked at how the numbers add up. How do we get all that additional renewables and other clean electricity on the grid? How do we deliver it to where it needs to get to? We've got a bunch of AI and data centers coming online and enhancing our electricity load going forward, to the point where a number of folks have taken a look at this, and a group out of Princeton and elsewhere have found that of all the climate benefits that we were just talking about with the IRA, a full 80% of those might not come to fruition unless we build out transmission and we get our grids working in the way that they need to, right? Because the grids are going to be so key, not only for the electricity sector, but as we think about more and more EVs coming in from the transportation sector, right? We need to have a way to deal with that increased load. We also have a lot more mobile batteries out there, so we can take advantage of that in really interesting ways and being smart about it going forward. But heat pumps coming into the system, you name it. We have a tough time in our country building things and building things quickly and at scale, and transmission lines are the perfect example. I had a chance a few months ago to be in New York City, where they finally were able to build a transmission line coming down from Canada to take advantage of some Canadian hydropower. It actually is going to supply, I think it's 20-25% of New York City's electricity, so a pretty big project. That project took 17 years.
That's crazy.
Which 17 years to 2050, like, that's not going to get it done. We need to shrink that way down, and we're working on several programs to shrink that down to 2 years, so we can do all this in a 2-year period of time and do it at scale. But you're right to focus on it, and there's a huge range of opportunity on the grids. It's not just the transmission line. One of the areas that gets some attention, getting more attention, is virtual power plants and smart demand response, right? Being smarter about balancing loads. That's such a huge, huge opportunity area.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Yep.
I'd like to take the second question, if you don't mind. Leading off of your statement that things are hard to build here in the U.S. I come from the country, and there's an incredible amount of potential for renewable energy projects to be built and operated and constructed in these places. And as I'm sure many of the energy developers in the room know, getting projects built in rural areas tends to be pretty difficult. There tends to be a lot of opposition for any number of reasons. I had someone from my hometown tell me that a solar farm would cause air pollution. So there's a wide range of sentiments regarding clean energy projects. And I just want to get your thoughts as a fellow small towner on rural opposition and the ways that the DOE is working to strengthen relationships with rural communities and energy developers.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Anthony. And I do come from a small town in Illinois, corn and soybean country. I was going to ask this group who thought the University of Illinois, which is my alma mater, was going to win the NCAA championship, but I figured that there's one. All right, we got two of us. All right, we got two of us. Great. There's actually a number 3 seed. They're a pretty good team this year, so we might surprise some people. So a couple thoughts for you. I think not just folks who grow up in small towns or rural parts of our country, but more generally as well. We're used to what we're used to until we're used to something new. And I think we're starting to see some people be like, just because we did something for so long doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. There are opportunities to do things in a smarter way, in a cleaner way, in a way that's more healthy for the local environment, let alone being part of the climate solution as well. And so I think we're seeing a number of examples of people making money off their land with wind turbines. We were just talking before this session on agrivoltaics, which is a especially cool area. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for farmers, ranchers to get a couple income streams, right, in a way that helps their bottom line, helps them keep their family farms going forward. But it's a lot of I find this job approaching with humility and listening a lot and trying to meet people where they are and then trying to figure out how we can all be part of the shared journey going forward. It's a lot simpler to say that than to actually do that. It requires an awful lot of time and effort to do that, but I think there's a huge opportunity, a payout economically, but also an opportunity to feel like you're part of the solution as well for your kids, for your grandkids, and stepping up. So. But we need to do all this and accelerate these timelines. We can't just wait for things to happen for 5, 6 generations and organically. Like, we just don't have that time.
I can take the next question. So regarding being part of the solution, my interests especially lie in business and making sure that there's financial investments towards these energy projects. And as you mentioned, when you showed the trajectory that we're on with the IRA and the new SEC ruling for climate regulatory reporting for scopes 1 and 2, what is the role that banks will play in this national landscape to ensure that climate investment is a safe and also a necessary investment for the future?
Well, as we were just talking about, if you want to get things done at scale in our country, it's the private sector and the investors who need to have the right incentives and have the leadership to move things forward. I mentioned that 140 countries out of a couple hundred countries in the world have net zero commitments. Out of the world's largest companies, actually half of them have net zero commitments as well. So there's some leadership within the companies, but they're in a very competitive environment and competitive landscape. That's where I think things like what the SEC is doing to just have transparency, right? If you're going to be a company and you're going to put a press release saying that you've got a net zero goal to 2050 or whatever it is, like, show me the numbers, right? And show me the funding streams and show me how your goal, what you're investing in, is compatible with what you say your goals are, not just in kind of a fancy press release, but like with the real numbers, and allow people in our country the transparency to like poke and prod and look at it and make sure it all adds up. It adds up to something. I also think it's important for companies to not just say, oh, government should do this or government should do this, and do it passively. They're part of the political ecosystem as well. And they've got an incredibly, at least I've seen it in DC, having been there now a couple decades, incredibly powerful voices, and they need to make those voices heard. If they really feel like needs to be a price on carbon or some other mechanism, put some lobbying heft behind those kinds of policies. And I think we're seeing a lot of corporate interest and corporate profit in the IRA and the bill. A lot of communities benefiting from that, and that's great. That's the positive incentive, positive momentum, positive feedback cycle I think we need to see on it. And it's all about the investors and putting in the funding streams for it and having the right incentives in place so that that is encouraged and incented in the way that it needs to be going forward. When people ask me what type of work should I get into if I want to get into climate and clean energy, what I say is, like, you can be a researcher, you can be an engineer, you can be a social scientist, you can be a MBA, you can be an investor, right? You can be every different conceivable job. There's so many ways to come at it, and we need really passionate people to really come at it from the investment side and the private sector side. Can I ask you guys a question? Is that fair? Like, you guys asked me something? What would you say, and thanks for sharing your kind of origin stories and why you're studying what you're studying. What do you say to colleagues or friends, and maybe we have some here who are climate curious, clean energy interested, and potentially thinking about that as a career opportunity? What would you say to them to share your perspective on, why you came to where you came, but how others might think about it from your own journey?
You want to start?
I can start. I guess my first advice would be get in there. This is a recurring issue. This is not going to go away. And also, companies value doing more with less, and that's all surrounding sustainable goals and everything that we have to do towards efficiency. And also, there's just so much innovation and so much versatility, as we've talked about, from having engineers, having researchers, even medical environmental scientists. There's so much that you can do, and this is something that's going to be incorporated in our daily lives. And if you want to pursue a career in it, then go for it. So,
I think the clean energy transition is as much a cultural one as it is a technical one. I think that, especially where I'm from, people are very concerned about what role they're going to play as a culture in the future. So when I think about West Virginia coal mines that my family grew up in, there was a sense of pride in producing American-made energy. You know, they took pride in going into the mines day in and day out and producing coal that powered Pittsburgh, Columbus, Washington, New York City. There's not as deep a connection to clean energy in that regard with some of these communities. And so that's what I've been interested in trying to navigate and trying to find a common ground where people who once worked in blue-collar jobs and jobs that they took pride in can also have that same sense of pride and belonging in the clean energy transition. And that's what motivates me every day, to try and learn as much as I can about the space, learn as much as I can about the policy and the finance and the logistics of this transition, because I want to see rural people take as big a part in this transition as the people in the city and the suburbs, because I think that they have merit and I think that they have a place in the future, and I want to be the person that helps facilitate that as well as I can. So that's kind of my reasoning and
Awesome.
my motivation.
Jackson?
Yeah, for me, I'd say to my friends, just get involved with with trying to prevent climate change. It's a problem. It's not going away. Our generation has to face it. And so there's really, like you said, there's so many different ways you can approach that problem. And even if it's not necessarily something that you're passionate about, just combining business and sustainability just makes sense. Kind of like Victoria said, like efficiency is so important. And so depending on what industry you're in, like everyone values efficiency and how do we do things for cheaper? How do we do things for less? And so there's just, it's a skill that you can use in many different career fields. And so that's what I would say to my fellow students.
Awesome. I'm sure someone's going to give us the hook when we're supposed to end. I've got one more question I want to ask you guys. How much time do we have for whoever's telling us? 5 minutes? All right. So if you guys save me 30 seconds, I just have 1 second. So if you guys have another question or two, feel free, and then I've got one question for you guys to end this, if that's okay.
I guess the last question we were going to ask you is, what words of advice do you have for students, and well, mostly students because we are students, but just anybody in general regarding the clean energy transition and staying involved and staying motivated?
Yeah, so I thought your guys' answers were phenomenal, so I'm going to double down on that kind of piece. The other pieces I would add is let your curiosity be your guide. You know what I mean? Like, curiosity is such a powerful thing. When people have done social science on who are the most successful people in lives, one of the common threads is people who are super curious about things and kind of follow the thread where it takes them. And it may not be where you think your career is going to go, but it may end up being that there's a better fit somewhere else. So kind of really let your kind of inner self, your inner curiosity, your inner passion kind of help you guide you on that. Two is don't feel afraid to reach out to folks who are doing interesting things and just ask them for an informational interview, going out to lunch, getting coffee or whatnot. For anyone who's had any success in life, it's because we've had mentors, we've had people who've helped us along the way. And other than maybe a few assholes out there, most people are really nice. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know. I got the mic. Most people will be really supportive, and because someone else has helped them, so many people have helped them, I think you'll get a really good response. I'm still an introvert. I was an introverted kid, and like I didn't want to disturb person X or person Y or person Z, but like people really appreciate it, especially if you approach it and say, hey, you've had a really cool career. Like most people like to hear that they've done something good with their lives in the first place, and they're usually really helpful kind of sharing their perspectives and their experiences as well. And then try internships. We've shifted over now to all of our internships being paid internships to make sure that they're available to everybody, not just people who can afford not to have a non-paid internship. Try out new things and try out new experiences. I did an internship in Washington, D.C. and just like loved the policy piece of it. And that was one of the driving factors for me to kind of go to D.C. after law school. All right, so final question for you guys. You can give a one-word answer. If you want to elaborate at all, you can. We looked at the chart. We looked at the trajectory we need to be on. I'd love to hear from you whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about us being able to get this done. And in a very short few sentences, if you want, what makes you either optimistic or pessimistic? And this is not just us in the US, this is everywhere around the world, right? This is a global problem. There's a lot of work to do. We need to decarbonize and get to net zero in just a few decades short period of time. How optimistic or pessimistic, and why? Who wants to start?
I can go first with
All
that. I'm going to say optimistic, and more so for myself. I know that if I want to create change, that I need to believe in the work that we're doing, and that is how we're going to actually get to the end goals that we have set out for us. There's definitely times, there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on, and there's definitely times where it's like, you have these grand goals, and you can't accomplish all of them. But again, like you were saying, you can find your niche, and you can start from the bottom up, and you can take it bit by bit, and I think that's why I'm optimistic. I seriously thought that your question was going to be who are we rooting for in the final,
Yeah,
March Madness,
you can add that too if you want to add in.
Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill, all right, there's one vote. Jackson?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I actually went to one of the panels that was financing the clean energy transition this morning, and it was really cool to see just how passionate those panelists were, and how important philanthropic capital and impact investing is in this space, and how that really unlocks all this private capital as well. So for me, that was really cool to see, and kind of opened my eyes to how we can create an impact, and just how there's already people out there that are working really hard towards this transition.
Awesome.
You're going to get a clean sweep because I am also optimistic. And I'm optimistic because of the people I've been surrounded with here at Carolina. Many of my friends sitting in the front rows up here.
Are you rooting for Carolina too?
I am also rooting for Carolina.
All right.
But many of my friends up here, I've been blown away by the passion with which people are pursuing this change and this transition, and the efforts that people are making to change just their little slice of the world is so inspiring to me, because I came to Carolina thinking I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the world. Well, the world is too daggone big. So if I can change what little bit of the world that I live in, and everybody does that, then the transition is going to continue to accelerate, and our world is going to get to the one that we want it to be by 2050.
And you can save the world and have fun working with people you respect and enjoy working with at the same time, right? My mom, who's now 88 years old, taught me an awful lot. Our parents and others who were influential in our life, she would look at the world, and there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in our world, but look at it as that's just an opportunity for us to step up, to find our niche, to find our place, and to make the world a better place, which I think is just a great way of looking at it. And thank you all for your passion already, and your future careers. And again, I hope others, thank you for those who have made careers and put your passion into this shared effort, this shared journey going forward, and I hope others consider doing so as well going forward. All right, can we give it up for our phenomenal folks up here? Thanks, guys.